Hello and welcome to another lawnfawn video. Today we're taking a look at the two new cactus borders. This is the cactus border and then this is the cactus hillside border that has that fun wavy hillside. Here's a look at the two dies and what they cut out. Each one will cut out a line of cacti and a coordinating dotted line to layer in front, as well as the little succulents that can be layered over the little succulents below the cacti. So let's assemble these so you can see what they look like together. We're just going to put a little dot of glue on those little succulents down on the ground, and as you can see, the die will cut out little pieces that layer over them. So you can cut these out of a different color and add more color to this line of cacti. Then you can take the piece that is cut with that dotted border right there, and this will layer right on the bottom. This allows you to have the cactus cut out of a green color and this ground piece in front cut out of a sand color. Let's go ahead and assemble the cactus hillside border die as well, doing the same method as before. So we can add those little dots of glue to the succulents along the ground. And as I said, the die cuts out all the succulents that will layer over these. So you have big ones and little ones too. And then of course there is that fun hillside with that cute little dotted detail just like the straight one, and we can layer this on the bottom too. Now let's make some cards using these fun border dies. First up, I'm going to create a card with the straight cactus border. I have a piece of kraft cardstock. This is a scrap, but I'm just going to use this to cut the top edge of my sand that's going to be my little desert. This will cut a nice straight edge and give me that little dotted detail. Now this piece is a little wider than my card, so I need to trim it down to 5.5. And then I have a piece of algae cardstock that is also 5.5. And what I like to do is bump my edge of my die right against that other piece, and I know that it is going to line up perfectly. So I've cut that out of some algae cardstock, and you can see that my kraft cardstock lines up perfect. But I'm going to add some inking to these die cut pieces to give them a little more dimension. I started out with tea dye distressing, but I didn't feel like that was dark enough, so I switched over to vintage photo, and I'm adding some inking to the top edge. For my cacti, I'm using some lawnfawn clover ink, and I pulled out a smaller ink blending brush, and I'm just adding some darker green color to the bottom of the cacti and the little succulents along the ground. And you can see that I'm not caring too much about getting my ink down below those succulents because that will be covered up by the kraft piece of cardstock that I had earlier. I also wanted to add some texture to this, so I pulled out my watercolors, and I'm just using the dark brown in this color palette to flick some little paint splatters, and then I'm flicking it off of an acrylic brush to get some smaller splatters as well, and we have that really nice texture. I've set that aside to dry, and I'm pulling out this yellow pattern paper from the Pint-Sized Patterns Summertime collection, and I'm using the 12 by 12 sheet. I really love this tone-on-tone yellow grid. I'm also using the little decorative piece from the embroidery hoop window and frame add-on die. This is going to cut a really cool design into my pattern paper. Now you can see that I drew some arrows on my die, and that was just so I had a guide to make sure I always had my pattern nice and straight on my page. I can layer this over a card base, and you can see that those little holes will allow the color of the cardstock to show through. So I want to add some inking to these pieces. I want this patterned area in the sky to look like the sun, so I'm adding some fake tan to this, and you can see that it really makes those little die cut etching lines stand out. Now to my card base, I'm adding some canned pumpkin ink, so this is a darker orange, and I'm just adding it all over where you're going to see it through those little holes that the die cut. So you can see when I layer that over, I'm going to get that dark orange behind there. You could also color this with a marker or some paint to fill it in as well. Now I can add this pattern piece of paper to my card base. I just think this has a really cool look for the sun in the sky. Now I want to go ahead and stamp my sentiment on there before I adhere my cacti along the bottom. And the sentiment I'm using is from the Critters in the Desert stamp set that says, "You desert the best for your birthday." And I've just lined that up in the top left corner. And I offset the sentiment lines a little bit because I think that adds some really fun to that sentiment. And then I'm finishing off the sentiment by stamping "Sorry I'm running late" down in the sandy part. And that's going to go perfectly with my images because I'm using that tortoise for my card today. So now I can layer this sand or desert piece on top of my cacti that I inked earlier. Everything is nice and dry. I was just removing a scout hair from my adhesive. And then I'm going to pop this up on my card. So what I'm going to do is add some foam adhesive all over the back of it. Foam strips are great for the bottom part, but those little thin foam strips that we have are perfect to go behind these cacti. So I've pulled off the liner paper from that cactus border, and then I will just line this up with the bottom of my card. And I love the look of these cacti over that big orange decorative sun in the sky. Now for my images, I am using images from Critters in the Desert as well. I have this little birthday cake and I am just assembling it by adding the candles to the back side of the cake. Then my cake is going to sit on top of my tortoise's shell. And then of course I have that cute little snake. Now I wanted to pop these up too, so I'm using some thin foam squares where these are going to overlap that kraft cardstock at the bottom, but where their heads are going to overlap kind of between the cacti, I need to kind of double pop this. So I'm stacking my foam squares one on top of the other. I have a full thickness foam square and a thin thickness, and as you can see, his head goes right between those two cacti, and that will support that head right onto that background piece in the very back. I'll do the same for my tortoise here, so I have those thin foam squares along the bottom, and then where it's going to go between the cacti, I will double stack those foam squares here. And then he is going to go over here on this other side. And of course, sorry I'm running late because that tortoise was probably pretty slow to bring that cake. Finally, I'm adding a little bit of gold gems to the sky just for a little bit of embellishment. And I've just sprinkled those around. I'm picking them up with my gem tool and dropping them back in place with a little bit of liquid glue. And then here is my finished card with that really cute cactus border. Next up, we're going to recreate a card by Elena using the Cactus Hillside border. We'll start by cutting out the Cactus Hillside border and the little bottom border that matches it from some kraft cardstock. And we're going to cut two of these. We have two cacti borders and two bottom hillside borders. Then we're going to do some inking. So we're going to start with our cacti and do a little inking with Distress Oxides. We're starting out with some peeled paint. We're going to go all over these cacti with that peeled paint. And it gets this really cool look with that green ink on the kraft cardstock. And of course we're doing this to both pieces because they are going to layer in front of each other. Next we're adding some forest moss just to the bottom for a little bit of darkness towards the bottom of the cacti. This gives them some really nice dimension and makes them look very realistic. Next up, we need to ink the hillsides that will go in front of our cacti, and we are starting out with some antique linen distress oxide, and then coming in with some brushed corduroy to kind of darken that up a little bit and make it not look so bright. Next, we'll take that same brushed corduroy distress oxide and smush it onto an acrylic block, add a little bit of water, and make this kind of wet, soupy, inky mess. And then we're going to flick that onto our cardstock to create some texture. So let's do the exact same thing to that other hillside piece, starting with that antique linen all over. Then we will come in with the brushed corduroy to add a little bit of darkness. And then of course we need to do the same to this piece and add that texture by smushing that onto a block, adding some water, and then adding those texture splatters all over this piece. Now that those pieces are dry, we can assemble those hillsides with the cacti that layer behind them by adding some adhesive to the back and just lining up that edge. We'll do the same to this piece here. And you can see that really cool look that that ink gives once it's nice and dry. We have that really cool chalky look to that distress oxide. Now for these two pieces, we're going to layer them together, but first we want to cut our background piece. And we're using the Radiant Heart backdrop and a piece of spiffier speckles paper to do this, so we have that really fun gold foil speckle in our paper. Next, we're going to create a custom frame to go around this and frame up our scene. And we'll be doing that by using one of the circle dies and a piece of white paper. So we picked the circle die that fits around this heart perfectly. We're adding that to a piece of white paper with some low tack tape. And then we're taking the next size down and we're going to line that up inside this circle, hold that in place with some low tack tape as well. And when we run this through, we'll get a white frame that fits around this perfectly. Now we're going to hide that little heart. We're not going to see that at all. We're going to frame up a cactus scene in this frame. So let's layer our cacti together and figure out how we want them to look. Now, one thing we really love about Elena's card is that these cacti peek out over the frame. I think that is a really cool, fun look. So we're threading those cacti through that white frame that we created. And then we're adding some adhesive to this second layer so we can line that up and stick it down. And as you can see, we're shifting it so that they do not line up perfectly and they kind of line up in between the ones above. Now we can add some adhesive to this white frame and adhere that into place, again threading those cacti through that frame so they kind of peek out and over the edge. And then once we have that in place, we're going to add a piece of blue paper to the back to fill in the sky above those cacti on top. So now that everything is stuck down, we need to trim around this frame, and we're just going to trim to where we're trimming right underneath the frame. So we don't have to worry about being perfect because that frame is going to hide any imperfections in our trimming with the scissors. And you can see how this is coming together really nicely. This is a really fun look and we really love what Elena did on her card. So we'll trim off the rest of that blue along the top. And now we have this perfectly framed circular cacti scene. And this is going to go right in the center of our radiant backdrop. So we can go ahead and add that adhesive and stick that down to our backdrop, making sure it is nice and centered and straight. And then we can add our little critters. So these are critters from Critters in the Desert. We have a little cake and some candles, some rocks to set the scene, and that cute little snake. I mean, if a snake can be cute. So we're putting that big rock on there first, which is where the cake is going to sit. I love the way that we colored this snake. Elena had those fun little stripes on him. We're adding our cake with our candles, and then of course these other little rocks to kind of set the scene at the bottom of this circle. Finally, for our sentiment, we're using the sentiment that says "You Desert the Best." We're stamping this in black ink on some white paper, and then we're going to use a sentiment banner die to cut this out. Now we're going to make a custom length banner, so we're going to kind of line this up with the left side of the banner die, pop that out, and then line it back up just by lining it right against the edge of the die, and then trim off that other side so that we have a custom length banner that fits our card. We're also adding some of that antique linen distress oxide to kind of dirty this up a little bit and make it match our scene a little bit better. And then we can just add that right below our critters. Finally, we need to add this whole thing to a card base. So we will flip this over and add some adhesive between all of those radiant heart lines, and we'll just pop that right onto a card base. We'll be able to see that white card base shine through those openings in that backdrop, which is a really fun look. So here's our finished card, inspired by Elena. Thank you so much, Elena, for letting us remake your card today. Now let's take a look at some cards by the design team. We really love this card by Grace and her window opening. I love how she incorporated the sun rays in the background and that hot air balloon. This card by Elise is really cute. I love how she incorporated Mr. Sun in the background. It goes perfect with those cacti hillsides. Rebecca's card is really unique. She used that scalloped fringe border to create her ground, which is a really fun look. And then this card by Yainea used the new Tada Diorama Sunburst window to frame up her cute little scene. This card by Audrey is so beautiful. I love the idea of a silhouette, but with white. It's just so striking, and I love that inked background. And then Marine used that cactus border to supplement all the cacti from Critters in the Desert to make this really cool slimline card. Mindy layered the cactus hillside border with the desert canyon backdrop for a really fun card. And then this card by Megan is unique. We love that kind of file folder look and how she created these two scenes on her card. Letitia used all the cacti borders to layer them together to create a super cute little place for her porcupine to live. And then this is the card by Elena that inspired our card that we recreated today. Thank you so much, Elena, for letting us remake your card. And here is another look at the card I created as well. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.